I think that one of the greatest joys for a parent is to have their kids realize who God created them to be, to have a solid self-identity. And with that, it's also my greatest fear that I might be steering my kid to be somebody that I want them to be, rather than the kid that God is creating them to be. This is something that we've seen come down in a number of different publications, and it's something that we're going to talk about next on the Celebrate Kids daily podcast, Facing the Dark. So we're going to turn now to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So Dr. Kathy, Summit Ministries recently wrote in a blog that, quote, choosing one's identity is a part of a larger trend of living your own truth. They went on to say that choosing your own identity, particularly that which is biologically determined, is not just a question of personal preference or personal belief, that it brings into question the nature of truth itself. While the truth questioning may seem to be a radical departure from what they kind of call Western tradition, it's foundational to what they understand is really Judeo-Christian values. Today's identity crisis, they think, did not come out of nowhere. They go on to say that, in fact, today's cultural view is part of a long history of Western individualism that has naturally led to what they call kind of the current crisis of identity. I thought this was interesting when I mixed this article a little bit and some of the ideas in it with an Education Weekly article about choice architecture. Essentially, this article from Education Weekly says that most people underestimate the power of how choices are created in front of us. They kind of say that you don't realize how much we can influence a kid's decision. Taking things, for example, of when we list ideas or options for a kid verbally, they're probably going to remember the first few items better than they do the last ones. If the list gets long enough, the first few start disappearing and they start to remember the last items, and that affects kind of what they choose. So I often think about this at night when I'm laying down, and these are some of my deepest, darkest thoughts, and I'm kind of giving them to you and because I can, right? And now this is now your weight to carry for me. But I think about this in terms of how I'm guiding my kids to kind of fortify their identity. And in that, when I'm guiding them to that, am I limiting their horizon based on kind of what I feel comfortable with? What would you say to parents who in some ways want to guide their kids down paths that they know lead to life, and at the same time have that pressure to kind of not limit their children?
I'm fascinated again by this, and I'm glad we talk about identity a lot. I hear a lot of questions from audiences I speak with about identity, so I hope that people appreciate we're coming back to this. The Summit Ministries article, choosing one's identity is a part of a larger trend. Well, choosing one's identity, we can't choose all parts of our identity. I think that's really important for adults to know and to believe and to understand and to teach that to children. You cannot choose whether you're male or female. I believe that. You can't choose if you're short or tall. I'm tall, I'm 6'1". I could choose to slouch and you think I would look shorter. I actually draw more attention to myself. There's certain things we cannot choose, a lower voice, a higher voice. Even our gift set, Ephesians 2:10 says that we're gifted in advance to do good work, that we would walk in them and really change culture through the use of those good gifts. So part of me wants to just reinforce this idea that much of identity is chosen for us by our good, strategic, intentional creator, the God of the Bible. Then it's up to parents and grandparents and even siblings to notice our children and what are they doing. Like I tell parents all the time, if your kid goes to the church nursery and always plays with the glockenspiel, she's asking for piano lessons. If you have a child who dances through the living room whenever a certain type of music is on the TV or the radio, that child is asking for dance lessons. If you see a child who always wants to go with grandpa and pound and nail and sand the wood so they won't get a splinter, that kid's asking for woodworking classes and going to, Lowe's and walking the aisles with, mom and dad. And so we can pay attention and we can help them discover gifts that were hidden so that we guide them down the paths that lead to life because they were already directed for them by their creator. And we're simply there noticing what the kids don't realize is happening.
Oh, I love that so much. I also kind of really want to highlight this Summit Ministries article because I think it's kind of great. They gave some incredible tips to help parents walk their kids through what they kind of called an identities crisis. They talked about having compassion and listening to understand and really making space for people who don't agree with you. It sounded like a lot of things, Dr. Kathy, that you've said before. Do you have any other words for parents whose kids are kind of wrestling with who they are? What else would you kind of say to parents to give them some encouragement? I kind of use that word on purpose, to give parents courage to step into hard places where their kids are wrestling. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I love that. For people who don't realize, encourage, the base of encourage is courage. And I love to teach that when we encourage people, we give them courage to be right and do right and to stand up and to own, what's going on in their world. So I love that you said it that way. And I agree that these recommendations are solid right here. I love the listen to understand. I like to say to parents, listen longer. Don't jump to conclusions when a child says, I think I'm pregnant, or I think if I was pregnant, I'd abort a baby, or, I think I'd rather be a guy. Don't panic and think that they've made major decisions and they're already going down that very wide and dangerous path. They're probably looking for your reaction. If this were true and I said it to dad, how would he respond? But they know it's not yet true. So I think we listen longer. We have that compassion and that empathy, and we love in the midst of the turmoil. I think being available, I will say until the day I die, we have got to be available. Be where your kids are. Be the Kool-Aid house where they want to be in your house with their friends. Sit in the backyard with them when they're hanging out, and be the one to offer to drive them to the theater or to the store or to the coffee shop where they want to hang out with a friend. Be present so that when they have questions about identity and any other number of things, you're the one they think that they'll talk to.
I appreciate how you give kind of insight on different kinds of kids too, and how parents can kind of parent different kids who think differently. And we have 8 kids in our house, and there's just incredible difference in how each of them looks at the world and process the world. So I'd like to maybe ask you this question. If you're going to give a guide to kind of parents to think about how their kids are kind of building their identity, maybe using the framework of the 8 great smarts, how would you kind of tell or encourage a parent to help their kids build an identity? How do each of the different smarts build their sense of who they are?
Very interesting. So I'll do it quick, and people can read the book who want more. Here's where my brain's going to go. Word smart children have to talk it out. They don't necessarily need a conversation. They need to just say it out loud. They need to hear it come out of their mouth. So they're going to be the chatty Cathys. They're going to talk a lot. They may or may not want you to influence their thinking. They simply want to hear themselves say things, and then they'll have a reaction to that. They're also going to be the readers and the writers. So they might be looking for a book about identity, or a book about culture, or a book about poverty if they have a friend now who doesn't seem to have much money, because they also tend to be learners. Logic smart people ask and answer questions. They have questions. They hate it when things don't make sense. I think logic smart young people today are often at stress because there's so much that doesn't make sense in our culture. The way that people are treated, the way that the systems work or don't work in their opinion. So listen to their questions, answer them if you can, help them find resources, including other people who can step into that space with them. They will want to understand things, even things you think they don't need to know. And you need to understand that if you keep saying, you don't need to know that, you don't need to know that, you don't need to know that, they're going to go find somebody else that will answer their question. So understand that not other 7-year-olds need to know, but your 7-year-old has a legitimate need to know. Picture smart people think with their eyes. They're very visual and dramatic with their eyes, if I could put it that way. They have vivid imaginations. They see things. They remember what they've seen. They remember the homeless guy on the corner 3 weeks after they drove by, and they're still wondering, Daddy, why didn't you give him at least a bottle of water? So be aware of how powerful their eyes are, and don't let them see what they shouldn't yet see, because developmentally they're not ready for it. Music smart people think with rhythms and melodies and music, and they might find a piece that represents an idea to them. I know, I'm a former percussionist. I was just at a fabulous church service that used a lot of timpani. Like when I hear timpani, I see the mountains roar. I see the ocean waves roar, and I just see it. I feel it. My whole body just envelops that. So talk to me about that, and help them find a song that demonstrates their things they're thinking about something. That would be a great assignment. Body smart people think with movement and touch. They need to be hugged. They need to be caressed. They need to have their shoulder tapped, their hair tussled, and they need to have that quality time with you in that way, sitting on the couch next to each other, reading the book, watching the movie or the documentary, or even the fireworks. And maybe you already knew to do that. They will want to move, walk, and pace when they're thinking about their identity. Nature smart kids are going to think deeper outside. Always, they will think deeper outside. Go for a walk, go to the park, go to the garden, go even to a garden shop or a pet store, and they'll open up because nature is what causes them joy, and that's going to cause their thinking to probably go to a deeper level. And so that might be something to think about. And then smart people think with other people. They're always going to want that audience. They love to persuade. They love to debate. If they have maturity, they can do it without arguing. They are collaborators, and they are good at reading body language. So if you want to influence a kid's identity who is people smart, be careful of your body language. They will believe what you show them more than the words you speak. If they don't line up, you're going to come across like you don't have integrity and you don't know what you're talking about, and that's dangerous. And then self-smart people think deeply alone. They need quiet, and they need more time to think of things. So if you do family devotions and you're talking about identity and what does God say about who we are, maybe you introduce an idea, maybe you sing a chorus, and then maybe you separate for 5 minutes. Everybody finds a place to go and think about it, and you ring a bell and everybody comes back to the table. And that gave your self-smart boys and girls a chance to have quiet, peace, privacy, and space so that they could go to that deeper thought process and come back and say, Mom, this is what I think. When if you would have kept everybody at the table, that self-smart kid wouldn't have had a clue.
There's something about what Dr. Kathy talked about today that made me think of these couple verses in Genesis chapter 15, beginning at verse 5. And this is what the writer records. God took Abram outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." Abram believed the Lord, and he credited to him as righteousness. There's something about these passages that I think inspire identity in people who read them. Partly because Abram was a man at this time who was almost kind of identityless. He comes out of Ur of the Chaldeans, almost seemingly following the insight of his father-in-law, and comes to this place where he has full reliance on the Lord and just believes the promises that God gives him. It's an identity that Abram would carry on and pass on to an entire nation of people that will influence and direct our understanding of God. And it's something that I pray for my kids, and maybe you do for yours too, that they would hear their identity being shouted, maybe even whispered to them by the Lord in some of their most vulnerable moments. And as parents, I think stepping into that prayerfully and maybe even encouraging our kids by talking about it can be a bright light that cuts through the darkness of trying to reinforce this idea of building identity for our kids. Well, my name's Wayne Stender, and for all of us here on the Celebrate Kids team, I want to say thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.